nothing bigger than the first game on the agenda with Parkside takes on South Morang. It's first versus second in the competition, and first time around South Morang won by 4 goals. It's the only game Parkside's actually lost this year, and of course South Morang losing the game in round 1 hasn't lost since that game in round 1, and we're actually now into round 13, so it's quite a stretch since they've lost any games. It's actually going to be played out at Pitcher Park in Parkside, so if anything that'll favour the Devils there, but South Morang in pretty good form, and I like the fact that they beat Parkside last time, and based almost purely on that, I think they might win this time as well.
Yeah, nine straight wins now, I think, for South Morang. So they've obviously lost round 1 and just haven't put a foot wrong since. And by all accounts, they were tested last week against Reservoir, but then their really good players stood up in the last quarter and got across line the Whitnalls and Jeanettes and that sort of thing. Really sort of gave them an extra push. So it showed they're not front running as much as it might look, even though they've won some pretty comfortable games. They've been challenged a few times this year and they've been able to respond and get the wins, which good sides sort of find a way to do. So that's all positive signs for South Morang, and I think they should continue on their way this week.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, because going in on the form of last week, you expect Parkside to win. As you mentioned, South Morang actually down by, I think it's about 20 points with about 7 minutes to play. Managed to hit the final 5 goals in those last 7 minutes. They got over the line by 7 points against Reservoir. Their coach actually had a bit of a chat with earlier this week, just said that they stole the game. That Reservoir was a better side across all 4 quarters, and he feels his side pinched it, but he did say it was a credit that they were able to actually come from a seemingly a position where they lost the game, and to come back and win was fantastic, with a few players short on the bench with injury. So a good win there, and as you mentioned, Whitnall and Jeanette with the 2-1s in particular who did drag them over the line. Parkside had a big win against Panton Hill, who you would expect that one to be a bit closer, but Parkside just wiped them to park in the first quarter, 9 goals to 1, and they weren't going to lose from there once they established a 50-point lead at quarter time. So this time around it'll be pretty close. I think Parkside, the fact that they lost the first time around against South Morang, they're going to have a point to prove, but I like the fact that South Morang hasn't lost since round 1, and there's a reason why they haven't lost a game of footy in 3 months, and I think they might just win this one. There won't be much in it, but I'm still leaning more towards the Lions winning this one. The next game on the agenda is Panton Hill up against St Mary's, and this one's really interesting because it's 5th versus 3rd on the ladder. St Mary's, as we mentioned, the surprise pack of the competition this round. They won last week against Heidelberg West, a game you'd expect them to win, and as good sides do, they win those games. They even I guess there was a reason some people thought there could be an upset with Heidelberg West getting so close to the Reservoir the week before, but St Mary's wiped up the park. In the first quarter opened up a 3-goal lead and just extended the lead with each quarter, so a good performance there. Despite Panton Hill sitting 5th on the ladder, I reckon they might be slight favourites going into this one, just purely because they're at home and they do play their home ground pretty well. First time around they travelled to St Mary's and won by 15 points in their earlier clash this year. So we've got form against the Boroughs, but I think Panton Hill is a lot riding on this one. They really need to push inside the top 4, and I think they might just beat St Mary's this weekend.
Yeah, I think as you said, with Reservoir having the bye this week, if they get the win, they do move up to 4th. I think even though they've played the extra game, but they'll be in front of percentage.
I think this might even them out actually. So I think they'll go on top based on the actual percentage given that. But as you mentioned, it is a big game for them if they want to push into the top 4.
Yeah, and even the fact when you look at the goal kicking for Division 3, when Panton Hill got 4 of the top 10 goal kicks in the competition, it shows that they can score, and they can score pretty well, and they have so many options. It's not like they have to go through just the one full forward or anything all the time. So they've got a lot of dangerous options up forward, and I think that should probably be a bit too much for St Mary's. But St Mary's, it'll be really close. St Mary's has been a great improvement, a great story this year, and who knows, they could spring another surprise this week.
Well, it's odd that we do say it's a surprise, and that also the Panton Hill's a favourites, because as we mentioned, there is a 2-spot difference on the ladder there with St Mary's in 3rd spot, with a couple more wins up their sleeve than Panton Hill. But I think if they win this one, they're probably almost assured 3rd spot on the ladder, and just it pushes another competitor aside. And this one is a massive game for both sides. I guess for Panton Hill just to make the top 4, but for St Mary's, win here pretty much shores up 3rd spot and almost guarantees they'll be playing finals footy this year, so plenty at stake. But for Panton Hill last week, the likes of Byron, Skipper Wilbox, Tristan Cranberg, all the best. So their better players are still playing well. I think they can continue that this week. They can get a win against St Mary's. And finally in Division 3, we've got Watsonia up against Heidelberg West. And the last time these two sides played, it was an epic encounter where both sides had them on a game. Heidelberg West gave up a 5-goal lead at 3/4 time and lost to Watsonia. I'm pretty sure that's going to burn, and they'll probably speak a bit of that during the week. Since then, both sides have improved further. Neither have won a game since then still, but Heidelberg West, as we mentioned last week, disappointing to go down to Reservoir by 3 points, so close, and conceded the last goal with not long to go. On the weekend, they were soundly beaten by St Mary's, and Watsonia had the bye. They've had a few big losses since their win, but I think at their home ground, and with a lot of stake, I guess, the loser of this one, if Heidelberg West loses, almost guaranteed to win that wooden spoon. If Watsonia loses, I guess they're back on par, and it's a dogfight until the end. But I think on their home paddock, Watsonia will win this one.
Yeah, it's amazing when you sort of say that the game between second last and last is a big game for the week. But obviously, when how close it was last time, and both sides having so much riding on this sort of games, even though they do play, I think second or third last round of the year, but as you said, if Watsonia win this one, they go 2 games clear off the bottom, so you think Heidelberg West would be stuck to last. And I think at home Watsonia will get their second win, but you think it'll be a couple of kicks. It'll be a close game, you think?
Well, I reckon another close game is going to be up in Division 2 when Epping takes on Diamond Creek. It's 3rd versus 4th on the Division 2 table, and these two sides have been neck and neck all year on the ladder, and I think this, when you just go back to the last time they played, where Diamond Creek was up by as many as 7 goals and got rolled by 5 points in the end. Aaron Willard kicking the final goal with about a minute to go on the clock and giving Epping the victory. We watched it last weekend in the NFL match of the day against Fitzroy Stars, and they were just far too good for Fitzroy. Led by 30-odd points in the first quarter and never looked back from there, and Willis was on fire again, kicked 5 goals. Daniel Moore is just probably the most impressive player in Division 2 football at the moment. His ability to ruck and just his mobility as well, to almost act as a rover once the ball's hit the ground. He can go forward, takes marks in defence as well, does everything you want to do, and can still kick running goals as well for a tall man. So he's pretty hard to stop. Diamond Creek, a big win on the weekend, so they're coming with a fair bit of form as well, and hurt by the last time when they lost. Diamond Creek sitting 4th on the ladder, still a chance to actually finish in the top 2, such as the closest of the top 4 in that competition. Haven't actually beaten the side above them just yet, and I'm pretty sure they're going to want to make a stand this weekend. But I think just based on what we saw last week against Epping and on their form since the Easter break, I think Epping might win this one.
Yeah, it was amazing you mentioned Big Daniel. That running goal he kicked, I think it was in the 3rd quarter from about 55 metres, was definitely one of the highlights. But yeah, Epping were just comprehensively too good for Fitzroy. They sort of almost put on cruise control after quarter time at scene. They were just doing what they needed to do to stay in front. And they actually finished up pushing the lead out a bit further, but they looked very good against Fitzroy. And even though Diamond Creek obviously had a big win last week, pushing it over 100 points in their win, but I think Epping will be too good, and Epping will probably be outright second favourite at this sort of point behind Dalponic to actually win the division. So massive game for Diamond Creek, as I said, needing to beat a top 3 team, but I don't think it will come this week against Epping.
It was a good win for Diamond Creek last weekend because we said it was a danger game with Thomastown. Obviously, they've improved performance. There's a couple 3 wins in the past 4 games, and also I guess against Lowell Plenty, only 1 point down at half time. So they really did push a side in Lowell Plenty who very few teams have been able to actually stay with for at least a quarter, let alone 2. They pushed them for a half, but they were no match for Diamond Creek last weekend, so it was a good win by them. Next up, Hurstbridge and Layla, and this one, as we mentioned last week, you don't like to say games could get fairly one-sided, but just the way Hurstbridge is going at the moment, and the way Layla's been playing this year, you think this one will be fairly one-sided. Unfortunately, Hurstbridge on the weekend went down by a pretty large margin against Lowell Plenty, more than 130 points. At half-time, 100-0, which is obviously not a scoreline they'd be happy with. Came back and kicked 10 goals in the second half, so they did show something for their effort. While Layla just got another win on the board, a pretty comprehensive win against Smyrna. I don't think that they were ever going to lose that one there. And again, Shepherd with 5 goals. Big Shannon Smith kicked 8, so he outdid his skipper on the day. Shepherd, since coming back for a bit of a holiday, he's just really relishing that roll-off forward again, and he's just come back and got straight amongst the goals again. I think it's 11 from the past 2 games, and I don't think anyone at Hurstbridge can quite possibly stop him, but also the midfield. And it is a bit undermanned with a few injuries in recent times, but I think they won't have any problems with Hurstbridge this weekend.
Yeah, and I think especially a little bit of a sort of side note for Labour, obviously seeing Lowell Plenty destroy Hurstbridge, I guess you could say last week, they'd want to sort of match that to show they're just as good as Lowell Plenty, so they'll really come out and want to put up a big score against Hurstbridge, and I think they will probably not have much trouble doing so, you think, against Hurstbridge this week.
Well, the next one as well, I think it's pretty straightforward for tipsters out there when Lowell Plenty travels to Mernda. Myrna got their first win on the board a couple of weeks ago, but as we saw on the weekend, struggled against Layla, and I mean against Lowell 20 the next week. It doesn't get any easier whatsoever. And for Lower, as we just mentioned before, a really comprehensive win over Hurstbridge on the weekend, 100-0 as I said at half time. So they got the job done early, and in the first quarter booted 8, kicked 7 in the second quarter. And they just have this ability to score massive scores week in, week out, and going to finals, it'd just be. They're really hard to stop first of all, but I guess the one time they were kept to a pretty low score against Layla, they didn't defend so well and they were comprehensively beaten, so they only kicked 8 goals in the day. So you can stop those forwards, which is easier said than done. It goes a long way to beating Lowell plenty. But as Layla said, I guess you need to really make it a low scoring game to have any chance, and I don't think Myrna has the capability of doing that against them this week. Benny Gill kicked 7 last week, Billy Barty got 5 and Darcy got 5 as well, so the big forwards are doing the job once again, and Clint Monger's back in that form where he obviously he's had played some pretty good footy in the senior side for Lower, and he kicked another 4 on the weekend. Was named best of field, so he's in some pretty good form. But you probably can't see Myrna getting really close to Lower this weekend.
Yeah, and I think it was the third or fourth time that Wellcome were able to get 50 scoring shots in a game. So they're sort of routinely being able to just kick massive scores, and they just blowing sides out of the water. When you're up 100-0 at half time, that's sort of definitely game over from that point on. And I think against Myrna this week, was obviously great. Myrna getting a win a few weeks ago, and they really started to improve off the field and that sort of thing. But Lower Connie could really make this one pretty ugly. You'd think maybe definitely think triple figures at least.
Well, Lower, it's interesting because it was 100-0 at half time, but the first time I ran against Hurstbridge, they also kicked 17 goals in the first quarter, so they've had some pretty impressive scoring records against Hurstbridge. I like playing them, and after a good start to the season for Hurstbridge, after coming up from Division 3, they've probably struggled, I guess, in the past 2 months or so to register those victories, and I guess a loss to Myrna a couple of weeks ago probably compounded all of that, and they really are struggling, so hopefully they can bounce back from that shortly. But this week you think Lower Plenty will be too good for Myrna, and the final game is it should be a pretty interesting one actually. It's Thomastown up against Fitzroy Stars. It's 2 teams with 3 wins on the ladder, and I guess now with a 4-game gap between 5th and 4th, I think the top 4 sides are all but sewn up and they'll be playing finals footy, but a lot of pride still on the line, and I guess the sides still amongst them still want to get up as high on that ladder as they can. Thomastown at home are actually starting to lean towards them in this game. Fitzroy earlier in the year were playing some pretty good footy and looked like a good chance of actually pushing into the finals. Haven't been able to be the team above them, and they haven't really been able to get close. They did on 2 occasions where they, I guess, ran Layla to the line and were outrun last quarter, and pretty good effort against Diamond Creek, but they haven't got within, I think it's within 20 points of any of those sides in the top 4, so you think it's going to be pretty, you wouldn't imagine now they can actually make the finals. On the weekend against Epping, disappointing the first quarter, but after quarter time there was only 1 goal difference in Epping's favour, so they did control the bleeding a bit, but they were never a chance of winning that game whatsoever. And Thomastown, prior to last weekend's match against Diamond Creek, they were actually in some pretty good form, 3 wins in the past month before that. I think they can take that form into this game at home. I don't see any reason why they couldn't beat the Fitzroy Stars.
I actually think that Fitzroy might win this one purely like, as you said, they were obviously soundly beaten in the first quarter last week, and they were able to put up a pretty good fight. They even won the last quarter by, I think, 3 goals, and they got out to 50 points in 3/4 time, and they pushed it back a little bit. But when they just have to take their chance to get out and run. When they did that against Epping, when they were running off half-back line, they didn't kick too well, finding their targets. But if they can do that, they have a lot of players that have a lot of pace and a lot of skill on the ball. So if they can do that, like Sharp was pretty good for Fitzroy on the weekend, made a few sort of skill mistakes that's going to happen when you're young and still sort of learning the game and that sort of thing. But geez, they can get out and run. I think they'll have less pressure on them this week, obviously against Thomastown they did against Epping, and they could maybe snatch that one. Obviously Walker was fantastic last week, and I think he'd be one of the keys again for Fitzroy this week if they are to get the win.
Well, those 2 players you mentioned in particular really did have good games. Despite the loss last week, Walker was good, and he got plenty of the ball and knows how to use it as well. And he's got a lot of dash coming off half-back, and also young Sharp, as you said, some of his probably defensive skills early on, with only a slight frame, he was probably bumped around a bit easier than he should have been, but he responded really well, and he was one of the better players on the day. Kicked a great goal where he got the ball and had 3 disposals and put in a few pressure backs, and then kicked a ripper goal in the second quarter, and it really sparked us. I think had a mini revival in that second term before Epping kicked the final couple of goals of the term to all but in their chances before half time. But as you mentioned, it could be a game where those runners can get outside and they won't receive the same pressure this week from Thomastown. You wouldn't have thought than what they got against Epping. But if Thomastown can restrict that run, I think it would go a long way to win that game. But also, I guess, Lionel Proctor again in the best, and just showing why he's one of the best players in the competition for Fitzroy last weekend. For the remainder of this weekend, we've got no juniors this weekend with the school holidays, but we've got a fair few junior representative games, so make sure you get down to Hurstbridge on Sunday where the boys are back in action.